it turns out that your body has got an opinion. Your head hasn't been asking your body for its opinion for a while, right? But if you were to say to people, I do this thing called human compass, like I say, imagine there's a question and the answer is somewhere in the world. Just close your eyes and rotate as you stand, just gently. And if you're listening to your body like a safe breaker will listen to in the movies, you hear them listening to the drums of the click. The same is true that your body will go there, not there, no, there, move there. We find that odd, but of course our ancestors navigated the world that way. They didn't just use their eyes or even their primary senses. They also felt. They used their instinct, their heart, their soul, in order to navigate quite complicated, quite hostile landscapes. And that's a little bit what you're reawakening when we go more into this flaneur state.
Hello, and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast, where you'll hear conversations that generate one aha moment after another for you. There is an enormous wave of goodness and progress well underway in the world that almost no one knows enough about yet. It is so well hidden by the negative noise in our media landscape that I'm calling this goodness a conspiracy of goodness. And if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably here because you're part of this wave. You're probably doing some remarkably important things in your own circles as a giver, a doer, or a helper. And the guests on this podcast will give you inspiration, joy, fresh ideas, and how to continue this role that you have in your circles. It is still an amazing world, and we're here to introduce you to some of the people making it that way. Every week, no matter the topic, we're going to take you on a little journey with people who will give you pearls for your own. And every day, you can see more and more of what's right with the world. So, welcome. I'm Dr. Linda Ulrich, founder of the mothership of this podcast, at a website called The Goodness Exchange, where you can have instant access to good news, stuff that should be covered in the news media, without politics and without ads. So there, we're focusing on what's right with the world, and the purpose of this podcast and the Goodness Exchange is to put a spring in your step again every single day. And we're going to get to that right now with a wonderful guest, David Pearl. David is an author, a speaker, and a business innovator. He is the founder of an amazing organization called Street Wisdom. It's an international sort of social venture that is helping tens of thousands of people in over 80 countries turn off the tendency towards being on autopilot and turn on to a world of wonder and see the world with fresh eyes. Street Wisdom is a movement. It's a nonprofit that's available to everyone around the globe. And it helps people first of all, it's run by a lot of volunteers, and it helps people from all kinds of major streaming platforms find peace of mind, more clarity, help see the world through eyes that are full of possibility. So just to give you a little bit of background about David Pearl's journey, it's been a circuitous one. David Pearl was a boy soloist with the Royal Opera when he was 9 years old. He sang with Placido Domingo. He was eventually a world touring orchestral player, and in 1994, something switched. He got asked by one of a large corporate leader to bring his powers of creativity to solve some of their biggest problems. And since then, he's been on a journey to help us all see the world with fresh eyes, using creativity and wonder and, extraordinarily new ways of considering what we can do new and different. So he's got 3 books, lovely. One is just the most fabulous title for a book I could imagine. It's called Will There Be Donuts? And it was among the top summer reads in 2013. Then there's a book called The Story for Leaders, and that's about the extraordinary power of storytelling, which is a topic all on its own that I can't wait to dive into, and we will hear a little bit. And his most recent book is called Wonderful. That's with an A. Wonderful. Human navigation for a complex world. These are some topics that we can all take flight from these days. David, welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast.
Oh, thank you, Linda. I'm just basking in the warmth of your welcome and just wish I could get my wife in here to say, someone raped me. No, that's wonderful. You're very generous. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this.
Well, I tell you, we wrote an article about your work in about 2 years ago, and we're going to make sure that people have access to that article because it really gives a lot of detail, a beautiful, fun video in it as well about street wisdom. And so right off, I need to say that almost anything that David and I refer to will be in the show notes. So if you go to the Goodness Exchange to listen to this podcast episode or watch it, we do it both in video and audio, you will have access to an even wider landscape of David's work and resources about what to do next. So I'll start right off by telling people that. So David, where does this come from? When did you decide that wandering around our cities or our spaces right outside our front door was a place to get some experiential learning? How do we get here?
Wow, it's a great question, and it's so easy to sort of post-rationalize and say, "Yes, I decided this," but I think, like a lot of life, I'm not sure if the idea came from me or through me, if you like. I often say I didn't found street wisdom; it found me. But so there was an emergent quality to it. But I guess, in fact, in the book, I try and trace back where it came from. And there were some experiences when I was a kid, which I had on the streets, some good and some not good. I sadly saw my brother hit by a car. He's fine now, but it was a traumatic experience. But it also taught me that what the parents call reality isn't as real as they think. It can be upended in a moment. And if it can be upended, it could also be righted in a moment. So it kind of shook in probably quite a helpful way. I wish it hadn't happened, but given that it did happen, it kind of made me think that there were things to learn out there in the world that probably weren't being taught in school. But I think the real catalyst was being lost. That I don't know about it's the same if it's the same for you, Linda. But I think it's a very human quality that you learn what you need to learn and then you teach it. I think most of what I've putting out in the world is stuff I've fallen over, picked myself up and go, oh, maybe somebody else could learn from that. So it's, I like to think I've got, I certainly not a master, but I think I've got the enthusiasm of a student. And I was lost. I was searching around, and I had been told, it was fine on the surface, but like a lot of people possibly listen to the podcast, there's a sense of feeling disorientated in the world that we're in, or not knowing how to steer through. There didn't seem to be any clear direction coming from outside, and I had that feeling of like, David, you better steer this ship yourself. And I remembered something that had been told to me in a quite esoteric setting. I've done lots of courses. I'm a real course junkie, and I've been all over the world. I've hugged trees. I've done shamanic work. I've spoken to oracles, and I love it. And something had been said to me years before at a place called Damanhur. Some of your listeners might know it's a spiritual, esoteric, but also very practical community in the north of Italy. I'm speaking to you from the north of Italy now, but it's a little bit further north. And I'd taken part in a wonderful ritual there. And I'd asked a question, what shall I do with this life? And part of the answer had the sentence, walk in circles in public places. And I had thought that was some metaphor. And years later, I suddenly thought, maybe it isn't a metaphor, maybe it's an instruction. So I thought, well, I'll try it. And I went to Leicester Square. If you know Leicester Square, it's a very busy square in the centre of London. And I started doing this. I started walking in a big circle. And I realized I was kind of copping out. I wasn't really, because if you walk in a huge circle, no one knows you're walking in a circle. So I started to tighten the circle. And as I started to tighten the circle, two things happened. One is I became incredibly self-conscious. Because if you saw somebody walking in a circle in a public street, you'd give them, it's a definition of folly, walking in a circle, right? But I noticed two things. One is that I was feeling very uncomfortable about that, and that the rule "thou shalt not walk in a circle" was in my head, no one else's. And the other thing is I needed to bother because no one could see me, because I looked into people's eyes and they weren't looking, they were thinking. So they were on the street and I suddenly thought, I'm surrounded by people who aren't actually looking, they're just worried. A lot of them were on iPhones, and basically it's something I noticed in the opera world is we have a thing called snake eyes, which is when the tenor usually is supposed to be looking lovingly at Linda the soprano, but in fact is looking inwards going, uh-oh, there's a high note coming, and it just worries. So your eyes are kind of glazed, and it's the look, if you look around when you're on the street, you'll see people, and no disrespect to people, but people aren't looking, they're thinking. They're not seeing, they're thinking. And so I realized that two things, that the street could be a wonderful place to explore development and one's own limits and how one limits oneself, but also that as busy as the street is, in a funny way, it's a private space because people are not seeing what's out there. Some people do. The police do. The police are looking often, and also panhandlers or people who don't have homes and have forced to live on the streets. They watch. So it was there was a lot to it, but that was, I think, the moment when I thought, the things that we call streets and hurry through on our way to our next task are actually rich territories for exploration. I wasn't the first by any means, of course, to do this. Anyone that knows the flaneur movement, which arose in Paris in the late 19th century, when, of course, they electrified the streets of Paris. They put electric light. And so, Paris became the city of light. And it meant that at night, where previously it was just too dangerous often to go out without a burly manservant with you, everyone could go out in the streets now, and a group of poets led by Baudelaire and Apollinaire started using the streets as places to dive into the crowd and disappear and have the kind of artistic revelations that previously they would have expected in a forest or in nature. And they were the first, I think, to explore in a real way the quite magical and spiritual potential of the urban landscape. So there's more we could talk about. But that was a long answer to your question. I hope that was helpful.
Well, I love the first question I was going to ask you was, what about the practical business of being a flaneur in your own circles? A flaneur is not a word that I don't think most Americans would know what that word is. I didn't know what it was when you said it. What about this practical business of being a flaneur? And first of all, tell us what a flaneur is.
Yeah, I mean, a flaneur is a character that's grew up. And it was often gently mocked, but he was or she was a stranger who would stand in a crowd and observe. And they would, often they were making notes and stuff, but their art was the art of social observation. And the flaneur was somebody who could be at home anywhere, always observing, always recording, enjoying the everydayness in some ways of life. And I think that there's a real clue there to an art that I like to cultivate, and it's something that anyone who does street wisdom can experience, which is, it's easy to say that magic is all around, and you said a beautiful thing in your introduction about cultivating to see more of what's right with the world, but how do you do that? And what we do in street wisdom is we have a few very simple exercises to help people become, if you like, a bit more flaneur-like. One of them, of course, is slowing down. which sounds easy, but you try slowing down, slow your pace, slow your breathing, we like to say, slow the speed at which your hair is growing, slow everything down. In other words, Linda decides to slow down her metronome. But what if you're doing it as we have in rush hour traffic in Manhattan? What you're doing when you slow down is you're violating the social norm, which is, let's get it going. There's a certain tempo to the street, and if you're in New York or London, it's fast. So in the slowing down, it's not just slowing your neurology down and the good things that we know about mindfulness. There's also a willingness to break or remake the social rules in your way. Yeah. Another thing we do is increase our awareness, and that's important because for many of us, it's our eyes have become the thing that is our main sort of system of awareness. But actually, there are smells, there are sounds, there's all of that stuff that you start to notice as you slow down. And the other final thing is to awaken. It sounds quite highfalutin, but basically awaken your physical intelligence. I'm sure you've spoken much on your podcast about this, but for one reason or another, we've started to think over the last decades, century or so, that our intelligence resides in our head, in our cranium. And of course it isn't. It's distributed throughout the body, and the body's wise. And awakening the body's wisdom and getting it to navigate, not, we put it this way, let your feet take your head for a walk. And anyone can do that right now. You could just stand up, and instead of deciding to go where your eyes tell you to go, you could just ask a question and rest. And let your feet turn you in the direction that your feet think the answer might lie. It's like a game as a kid. It's like a treasure hunt. And it turns out that your body has got an opinion. Your head hasn't been asking your body for its opinion for a while, right? But if you were to say to people, I do this thing called human compass. Like I say, imagine there's a question and the answer is somewhere in the world. Just close your eyes and rotate as you stand, just gently. And if you're listening to your body like a safe breaker will listen to in the movies, you hear them listening to the drums of the click. The same is true that your body will go there, not there, no, there, move there. We find that odd, but of course our ancestors navigated the world that way. They didn't just use their eyes or even their primary senses. They also felt, they used their instinct, their heart, their soul, in order to navigate quite complicated, quite hostile landscapes. And that's a little bit what you're reawakening when we go more into this flaneur state.
The wonder there is just now I'm filled with curiosity. So one of the things that you say is that knowing our body and our innate navigation, we can just step outside our door. Like, we don't have to go on wild vacations to experience the wonder and open up these parts of our brain that is asking better questions. I mean, this is something available to us all, right? Well, during the pandemic, we probably had to do it indoors, but tell us what we'll find when we go to the Street Wisdom website and how the groups work and how individuals tap in and all that. Just give us a super basic understanding of what Street Wisdom is.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. Yeah, I mean, the beauty, I mean, like you, I think, Linda, I love to go into complicated and intellectual, curious corners. But what has been beautiful about Street Wisdom is the discipline of simplification. And so over many years, I wanted to create something which I have with my colleagues, which is so simple that it doesn't require any additional information or buy-in. You just follow simple instructions and it works. And so I say with pride that it's a quite simple process. It's in 3 parts. There's a tune-up where you tune up your senses, tune in really to the world around you. There's a quest, which is a period where, awoken, with your senses awake, you go for a walk asking a question. And it can be any question you like. And you begin to record what you notice. And it can be through any of your senses. It's a smell, it's a sound, words on an advert or whatever it is, and then in the final section, you share. There's a thing called the sharing, where you share whatever popped out at you and how it might be an answer to your question. What you find on the website is you find simple instructions about how to do the experience, what I call a workshop. We call it a workshop. How to lead one. If Linda, you want to lead one with a few people live, you can do that. And also if you want to hop on one online, and there are many online, you can also do that. It will also direct you to Spotify and other places where you can download what's become very popular, which are audio guides, where I take people through the stages of the workshop at their own speed, so they can listen to them. We've broken them into small chunks, so they're like little audio tracks, and people seem to love them because they can put them on and listen to them, do the street wisdom in their own way, at their own time, at their own speed. And that was the intention, that we could, when we started, we felt people all had to be together and it had to be live. But partly the pandemic taught us that we can do it powerfully online. But also, over time, we discovered what's important. And there are a few simple instructions. These are available on free Spotify downloads, currently in English, but soon to be in multiple languages.
Nice. Okay, so one of the things that that we talked about that I was kind of fascinated by is this practice that you or practice or a process, I'm not sure what you would call it, where I am you. Talk to us about that. I think that you have some interesting thoughts on that topic. I am you.
Yes, I think I must have been a strange child, actually, because that's an exercise that I created for myself when I was a kid. But in addition, just for clarity, so there's the basic, if you like, the fundamental street wisdom, which is what I've just described. There's a whole community of volunteers, as you've described, as you've mentioned, who have sort of fallen in love with it, taken it on, and for them, and I call them jokingly street wizards after street wisdom, and that doesn't mean it's just men, obviously, it's gender non-specific. For them, we've generated extra activities, I think a practice is a good word, by the way, because I think that's what it is. This is creative practice. And one of those practices is, as you mentioned, I am you. So if anyone wanted to try this, the idea about this is, and I think it's something that often happens when you do a street wisdom-like experience, which is you get a simultaneous sense of your uniqueness, but also of your connection with everyone in the crowd. Does that make sense? It's a simultaneously, I am very me, but also I'm very like everyone else. And why I think that second thing is super helpful in our very individualistic age. I mean, everyone's walking around with their own playlist and own Facebook page, and their likes and their followers and all that stuff. Okay, fine. It's a feature of life, and certainly putting people at the center of their story, as we maybe talk more about story, can have a powerful effect. But it also, we often feel cut off from other people. And so one of the exercises, as I say, as a kid, it really more happened to me than me thinking about it. But essentially what you do is and be respectful when you're doing this, but you're walking along a street and you see someone like Linda walking along the other direction. And what I do is I imagine that I can jump out of my body and out of this fleshly vehicle and jump into with permission, Linda, I would jump into your body, as it were, and walk off in the opposite direction. And why that's both odd and fun, but why it's powerful, I think, is it reminds us that we are much more alike than different. And in many senses, and in many esoteric traditions, they would say that we're not really separate. We're just fragments of the same divinity or same life force or whatever it is. And so I find that it challenges our idea of what a stranger is. I think I talk in the book about, the fear of the stranger and fear of the other. And there's a lot of othering going on in your country and in my country and around the world. And I think one of the things that is a helpful practice for us as people that perhaps want to diminish that fear, diminish that other, is to do an exercise where you just remind your ego, which is, after all, it's just the part of you that thinks it knows who you are. Right? It thinks, I know who David is, and he finishes at his skin, and I'm going to keep him safe. Good to have an ego in many senses, but also used to be to flex that ego to include other people. And I think an exercise like I Am You is both, it builds your spirit and it's humbling as well. And I think those two things are quite helpful. And it doesn't require anything more than just a slightly mischievous spirit.
And imagination.
Well, imagination.
Imagination is I think it's the thread of connection that we all have access to. We can grab that thread and we can be pulled along by it. Right? But you have to have your mind loosened up a bit.
I love, imagination. Do you mind if we just talk a bit about that? You just sparked something for me, because I think for me this year, I mean, imagination is a word we use all the time, and I use this often. You don't think about it, but one of the things I think is amazing about imagination, and this relates to my work on story, is that we humans have an ability to see what isn't there. We can create an image in our minds of something that isn't there, and we assume that's easy, natural, normal, and everyone can do it. I think it's quite amazing faculty. Yuval Harari talks about this in Sapiens as being a kind of vital sort of link in the evolutionary chain, a catalyst that powered our evolution as much as language, standing on our hind legs and opposable thumbs. Because when human beings could see something that isn't there, Linda could say, I see, into the future. I see in the future, and 400 miles away, I see a new settlement, a place we can be happy, a place where the streets are paved with gold, or whatever she might say. Because she can picture it, I can picture it. And when we have a similar picture, as you say, we can align about what's now known, as vision and so on and so forth. And I think it's really important. And because we have that, we're very prone to, and very suggestible to, things like the media and so on, that love to paint nightmarish images in our mind of what's around the corner. No one knows. No one knows what's around the corner, really. So there's a lot of guesswork and a lot of image making. And I think that one of the things that we could be doing on this podcast and elsewhere is exercising our imagination, particularly so that we can see better futures. And the reason I say that is because you can get criticized as being unrealistic. I'm sure you've had this, and impractical and dreamer. Oh, you're a dreamer, Linda Ulrich. Dr. Ulrich, you're a dreamer, you're an idealist. And what people are often arguing for is the bone-crushing, soul-destroying image that they say is more likely. But actually, the human race has got this incredible ability to see things better or worse. And I feel like we need to be exercising our imaginations, particularly to see better futures. Because put it this way, if we imagine better futures, there's no guarantee they're going to happen. But if we don't imagine them, there's a guarantee they won't. Yes. Because anyone who thinks that politicians or the church, or no disrespect to religious institutions or science, but if anyone thinks the cavalry's coming to give you or me a better image of the future, we could wait a while. I think we are the cavalry, Linda Ulrich, we are the cavalry, and we need to exercise on a daily basis the ability to see better ways of living, learning, loving, laughing, and so on and so forth. And that's underneath a lot of what runs through my work, both in Street Wisdom and Story for Leaders and so on and so forth, which is let's exercise that extraordinary faculty of imagination that you just mentioned.
Yeah, a thought leader said to me recently, the future isn't something that just happens. We create it. We create it every day. Every day, our tomorrow is what we set up for yesterday. So I want to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about street wisdom and the power of choice and authoring our future. Hey, Dr. Linda here. Did you know that a recent Harvard study found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news each day will make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Just 4 minutes. We've all got that much time to devote to our worldview and our sense of flourishing. Yes, if you make a habit of learning about just one piece of remarkably good news each day, you can be the one in your circles with fresh insights, ideas, and a sense of strength. Okay, so that takes care of the problem in our personal lives. But what about our work environments? We need to feel like we come alive there, that we have meaning and purpose there. Well, enter the Goodness Exchange for business. For companies that want to create optimistic and values-driven work cultures, our content can give you a way to turn aspirational ideas like positivity into a concrete way of being in the workplace. In fact, employee retention and attraction may depend on your company's ability to nurture a tone of innovation, interesting collaborations, and possibility. And most importantly, the Goodness Exchange can meaningfully elevate your company's wellness efforts and benefits packages, because your work culture can be offering employees something new, peace of mind, and that sense of flourishing I mentioned before, where employees' well-being isn't just a perk. It's the way we care about the individuals in our workplaces. So if you'd like to chat about infusing your culture with a tone of celebration, about goodness and progress, we'd love to chat. Contact our CEO, Liesl. Her email address is info@goodnessexchange.com. Thanks. Okay, we're back with David Pearl, founder of an amazing organization called Street Wisdom. And what we're talking about today is opening up our minds to get off autopilot and appreciate the strange and wonderful all around us, just outside our door or in the room we're in. We just need to open up our minds, and Street Wisdom is a giant movement around the world that is giving people the tools and sort of fresh ideas on how to do that. So thank you for joining us, David.
My huge pleasure.
So when we took a break, we were talking about authoring the future. And, I don't know if this autopilot problem that we're on is at the heart of it. I'd be interested to hear how you think. But you talk about helping people choose options that we're going to be really proud of. Talk to us about how opening up our mind, getting off autopilot helps us do that.
Yeah, I mean, that idea that, the idea that the future, it really helps me anyway to think, what choices can I make that the future deserves, if you like? Because I think, there's many ways the future, there's an infinite number of possible futures. And maybe I've often wondered, what am I doing? How do I describe what I'm doing? And I thought maybe what I'm helping people do is help them make choices the future will be proud of. You know what I mean? That would be an interesting way of thinking about it. And what I think mitigates against that is, as you said, if we're on autopilot, because the instructions that we would be following on autopilot aren't our own. We have been programmed by others, and they may have the very best intentions. But I'll often ask people to look into their brains and go, look, everything in your mind right now didn't happen, isn't happening, and isn't going to happen. And by what that I mean is, our memories, did it really happen when I had that fight with Linda? Who said what with it? It's like everyone laughs. Everyone knows that your memory is selective. Very few of us live in the present, really the present moment. You've got to be a Zen master to do that. And then everything about the future is essentially guesswork, okay? And humans don't like that, so they create stories about the future. Now, often if you look into the story files of your mind, those stories that you're living, you didn't put them there. And I'll often say to people, who put them there? And they'll put up their hands and say, my parents. Yeah, perhaps the very best reasons. They have an idea about what David and Linda can do. Who else? Your teachers. Yeah. Who else? Politicians. Absolutely. How about advertisers? Yeah. Your education system and so on and so forth. So I think that for a way of thinking about our trajectory forward is that we're following a storyline that may or may not be ours. So what I try and do is two things. One is have people take a look at the stories in their mind and maybe choose their fiction. Yeah, choose the fiction you want. Another thing, though, is to create the fiction that you want to make real, which is what I call authoring the future. And again, the skeptical people go, yeah, but there's no guarantee that this is just make-believe. Well, show me something that isn't. You know what I mean? And they'll say numbers, and the numbers aren't I remember I had a finance minister once take me aside, and he said, David, the thing about numbers, and he's the finance minister of a major country, he said, the thing about numbers, he said, all numbers are either looked up or made up. And those that are looked up are made up. In other words, the things that people love to think are real and solid, when you talk to people that really know numbers, they'll tell you, it's more philosophical than that. So given that nothing's fixed, what would it be like to create the story of the future? And a lot of people think, well, they do half of it, right? So they'll go, I want these nice things to happen to me. Oh, I'm going to be Beyonce and I'm going to make a bit. And there's that that's only half of it. Because if you look at stories, they have ups and they have downs. They have light and they have shade. So part of the art of creating a story of the future is writing the trouble in. And people don't initially like that. But then when you ask them, look back in life, where did you learn the most? Where was there most joy? Where's the most juice? And it's rarely at the top of the curve. Right. Honestly, very often, none of us like to quotes go down, but very often the turning points in the story, in your story, are the ones that show us who we are. Yeah, they are the ones and show the world who we are. And so whilst you're tempted to go, oh, my future story is just going to be a golden runway climbing up to a beautiful end and full bank account, all my own teeth, great sex life, whatever it is. The human in you goes, that is going to be really dull, right? The question is not the what and the how, but the why. And this is what's underneath both street wisdom and story, which is the power of intention, which I'm sure you've spoken and talked a lot about on this podcast. But I do think in the age where we're deluged with information and options and choices, we have to fire up our internal why more than ever. And we could talk more about that. But I think not necessarily following an objective, but following an intention is very, very important. It's key to my book on meetings. People they roll their eyes with meetings, but meeting, if I can just stand for that much maligned thing, the meeting. You and I are meeting now. I think the problem is the noun, not the verb. The ability to meet is gorgeous. It's glorious. It's the source of our human connection. It's amazing. Meetings. The noun are a kind of mechanism, and for most people, they're a mechanism that is life hollowing. One of the reasons for that is they're driven by what, not why. And when I'm working with organizations and individuals, it's like you go into a meeting with a strong intention and an intention that is powerful, that will generate value for everyone in the room, and everything changes. It's not the what that's the problem, it's usually the why. We could talk more about that. But anyway,
Yeah.
I can't even remember what the question was, but
Well, it just reminds me of something you said during our pre-call. You said, treat the world around you like a crazy partner.
yeah, I mean that's an interesting. I think loneliness is people feel quite alone, and I think and also they find the world around them it can be distracting, it can be noisy, it can be threatening, and for that reason, a lot of people we fall in on ourselves, and I'm totally recognize that in myself as well. But I think the last few years have been the world has demonstrated to me that if you can open up to the world around you and indicate you want to play like the world's a puppy, it will play back. If you love it, it'll love you back. Now, I say this with all due respect to people who may have had much less than lovely experiences in the world, and I'm not trying to be too Pollyanna, but it's an attitude which I think is worth exploring if you're privileged enough to live somewhere where the streets are relatively safe and so on, is to think about the world around you as making offers. And not as something that you screen out, but something you open yourself up to. And if I can say one thing, is follow the distraction. You know that thing, the flirt, what Jung calls the flirt, and the thing that's at the corner of your eye. We were told at school, do not be distracted. Linda, you'll never become a Dr. Linda Ulrich if you are distracted. Stay on the straight and narrow and do the list in the order that we've set it out and tick, tick, tick. And that's great at a certain point in our life. But I think the world we're living in calls us into the side streets. We need to learn to follow the glimmer, the whisper, the flirt. I think that's often where the treasure lies, not in the predictable, not in necessarily down Main Street. Does that make sense?
I love that. I love that. It reminds me of something that you said, that how we are, this particular thing that you're talking about can either lead to a distraction, like the digital world can like suck us in with that, almost that same sort of principle that you're talking about, yeah. Or we can choose not to. You talk about this notion of being the kind of person that says, hey, did you see that?
Yes.
And that could be full of good things that we see on the internet or good things that we see on the street. But a lot of times we get sucked into this this channel of low energy. And I think it's the reverse sides of the same coin that you just spoke about.
Absolutely. And again, if I can say that in myself, I notice that intention again is the key. And I am a doom surfer, or whatever you call it, doom scroller at times as well. And if I am intentionless, if I'm a bit of a vacuum, and I'm in either the street or on the internet, I can be led. After all, on the street, people are basically trying to sell you stuff. There's adverts, there's shops, the streets are very transactional, and people are trying to sell you stuff. So you can get drawn that. But it makes all the difference in the world if you enter, whether it's the internet or the street, with a strong intention. And I think that, to go back to street wisdom for a second, the way it works is people tune up their senses and they go for a wander, not a walk, but a wander. That's to say a non-linear, it's a wiggly route, yeah? But what causes the wiggle is asking a question. So I might say, and the question, we give hints about the kind of question. Basically, don't make it too huge, like why is there life on Earth? Don't make it too small and insignificant, but go for something. We often work with businesses all over the world, and we'll ask them to take a business problem. The only caveat is it must have me in it. It must have you in it, the person. It's not like, why does company X, or how will company X grow? It's not that. It's how can I help, or what would it be like if I were to? It needs to be perfect because we've got two legs, not 1,500. And so it's a personal quest. As soon as you have a question, and for example, one I love is show David stuff he needs to know now, but he doesn't yet know. So in other words, what is it that's in my blind spot? Well, you can't by definition see it. But if you ask that question, what does Linda need to know now that she doesn't realize? Yeah. Suddenly, and you let your body take you, suddenly the distractions you talk about, it's much more like following a paper trail, clues in a treasure hunt or something. Yeah. You activate your awareness, your senses and your awareness, and suddenly the distractions are meaningful. And your mind makes meaning. I often say to people, yes, creativity is about joining the dots. But first you've got to collect the dots to join. And so I think what is useful for all of us as people that like to feel they want to have creative ideas is go do some dot collecting. And the street is a wonderful place. The outside world's a wonderful place to collect the dots to join.
So how I've used your the street wisdom ethos, or how I thought of it. Recently I was in Boston at a seminar, and I'm having some questions in my mind. What should I do? What should I do about this personal problem? And do I speak up? Do I let it go? When do I, whatever. And I posed myself the question, and then I just took a walk in downtown Boston. And am I thinking about this right? What happened was when that question was constantly playing in my mind, I noticed part of a sign that had a word in it that was covered up by another sign, but the word I needed to see was the part that was revealed. I probably wouldn't have noticed it had I seen the whole sign. And it was the word good. And it was part of a longer title. And I was like, oh, I need to see the good in this person right now. I need to stop only seeing the bad and the parts that's disappointing and take a mental journey about what's good there. Okay, so then I'm walking down the street. I'm just giving people a real life example. I saw some cracks in the street, and they formed like an image in my mind and that triggered another better way of thinking, a better question about this problem. Is this sort of the way it works? You practice the art of noticing, and if you have a question, a little bit of a quest on these wanders, your mind seems to be a sense-making machine, and it comes upon different answers that you would never gotten to any other way. Did I kind of capture that right?
Yeah, I mean, you describe it so well. You describe it really, really well. And I think that that's, as we said, the question is essentially a simple way of being intentional. You went out, you didn't just go for a walk to get away from the problem. You took the problem for a walk, and you start noticing things. And it's interesting to me because there are people that do street wisdom that firmly feel as though the message is coming from outside. They're saying, and that's great. There are others who say, no, it's not. It's really, and I think this is quite interesting, that actually what you're seeing is what Linda already knows, but she doesn't know she knows. So put another way, an exercise like this takes what's in your unconscious mind, puts it out there so you can see it, so you can spot it, because in our unconscious mind, it's by definition not conscious. In other words, Linda noticed good because it was Linda looking. As the Tibetans say, what you're looking for is what is looking. I would seen something different because I was looking for something different. So I'll often say to people, you didn't just walk through the street, Linda, you just walked through Linda. Everything you saw, in a way, is Linda looking out and projecting back. And whether you're an outside in or an inside out person, I could care less as long as you're getting value from street wisdom. But I do very much resonate with what you say. And sometimes also it's very simple things like that word. I'll give you an example. It happened to me. I'll confess now, just because it's us, just us listening. Sometimes I may be the founder of Street Wisdom, but sometimes I just don't want to do that. I just like, oh, not please, can I just walk down the street? But I promised my colleagues that we would all do a Street Wisdom about Street Wisdom, because we got to a point in our development where we needed to think about what came next for the nonprofit. And I was like, I was in New York, and I was like, I had to get to the airport. I was like, I don't want to do this. But I had to, so and I was so shirty, and I was so grumpy about doing the tune-ups, and partly I thought it's not going to work. It's not going to work, Well, blow me. I do the tune-ups, and I turn my head, and suddenly there's a news agent, place selling magazines, and the only word I can see is Pearl, my name. It must be 70 examples of my name screaming back at me. Wake up, David, basically. It was like, and my jaw hit the floor. What had happened? It happened to be the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, and the magazines were all backed up, but all of the spines had covered the word harbor, and all that you could see was the word Pearl. And the hair stood up on the back of my head, and I thought, David, pay attention. And from then I had the most extraordinary, revealing 45 minutes. But I'm saying that in all humility because, day to day we relearn our skepticism, and we lose the magic. Which is why my book is, it's about how to find the wonder in the everyday, every day. How are we going to do that? We need, So anyway, yes.
All right. So that was lovely, because I was going to ask you about a specific, I had my own little awakening moment there, and I was going to ask you to tell us about one of yours. So that's perfect. And what I hear in your story and mine is we're not talking about something spooky here. We're not getting some messages from outer space or however it's a message from inner space. It's like, what you give your attention to expands. Like once we understand that, we can grow. We can, and only then, pretty much, right?
And I'll be honest with you. I mean, yes, that is absolutely true. You said it beautifully. In fact, I need to rewrite the book now you've said that. But, and it's not spooky, but I have to say the wonder often comes from things you just cannot explain. I mean, there's a chapter in the book called Synchronicity, with the word city, it's the synchronicity of the city. And what I love is when I and other people, there is absolutely no way of rationalizing what happens. There's no way of understanding why you bump into the perfect stranger, the professor of biology who has the answer, or you suddenly meet a friend who you haven't seen for years, and that's exactly the right person. And the reason I wrote the book is because we had thousands of inputs from people around the world who shared their stories, small and large and so on, in the sense of, some people have what they think of as small things, and other people have revelatory things. But there is a wonder afoot that we are not necessarily registering. And it's not just to do with, if I look at that dandelion, I'll appreciate its beauty, which is absolutely true. But I think that when you allow yourself to consider that we are not disconnected,
right?
Science, and you know more about this than I do, Linda, you're a dentist. My dad was a dentist, and he was a pretty scientific guy, and he wasn't having any of this connection thing. You are a random bag of chemicals wandering around a lonely universe for a limited period of time. And that, my friend, is it. So, okay, fine. That's your view. But if you can open yourself to the idea we're more connected than we think, not just with each other, but with the environment, well, guess what? Interesting connections start to happen. And it's my preference to think that the world is more connected. And when you do that, crazy stuff, I mean, crazy in the best sense, unexplainable stuff happens. And that's, after all, what people go to the movies for. They want to see Hogwarts. Well, I'm telling you, people, practice street wisdom, and Hogwarts gets realer by the day.
It is so true. It is so true. And, one of the things that I don't want us to get out to wind down without talking about is these, you have this great rap about the other people's story. You don't know let's see, an enemy is only someone that you don't know the story about. Back to how other people factor in our story and this. I want you to speak a little bit more about story for us, because I believe that the stories we're telling ourselves are creating a whole bunch of limiting beliefs that we just act on day after day after day, and we don't even realize it's all made up stuff, maybe ruled by fear. And when we operate from wonder and love instead of fear, we got a whole new landscape of possibility in front of us.
Yeah, I mean,
give us a little bit more direction about how we, in our wanders, to pay attention to the stories we're telling ourselves.
I think that's really true. I think not just listening to the words that you hear in your head, but also the tone of voice and the voice you're hearing it. Who's telling that story? Those of you who've done neuro-linguistic programming, NLP and stuff will be conscious of that fact. But the first time someone said that to me, it blew my mind. I remember saying, oh yeah, I'm not going to remember this. And he said, how do you know that? There's a guy called Michael Breen, who's my first teacher in NLP. He said, how do you know that you're not going to do X? I said, what do you mean? He said, how do you know? I said, well, I think. He said, but how do you know you think? He said, well, I can hear it in my head. He went, you can hear it in your head. Do me a favor, he said, say the same thing to yourself, David, but use Donald Duck's voice. So I got my brain to speak to myself in Donald Duck's voice. And of course, I just started to laugh. Those stories don't have the same grip on you if you change the voice. That's number one. The other thing, and it's, be careful doing this with your partner, by the way. When they say, you say, well, that's just a story you're telling yourself. You could get into very deep water there. But I do think story listening is super important. Listening to other people's stories and the way they're limiting themselves. So the 2-part practice is, if you're feeling bad, consider what story you're telling yourself, and particularly, how is time operating? If you're feeling bad, you're telling yourself a story where time is not serving you. You're either saying it's too late, it's too soon, you're too young, you're too old, it's going to last forever, whatever. Just changing the time component will give you some freedom. Yeah? Yeah? Just the word yet. Yeah, the word yet will change your life. I can't be an astronaut yet. So the brain, okay, yet. And put that voice, put Jude Clooney saying yet in your voice, or whoever works for you. But the other thing is to listen, and this I've learned over time, because people always want to teach them about storytelling, which I'm happy to do. But in business particularly, I've encouraged leaders to story listen. And that's to say, when somebody comes to you with a story that doesn't serve them, ask good questions. Questions which will wobble their model. Because really, a story is just a model of the world, right? And this is not as hard as it sounds. Your mother, your granny used to do this. When you went to your granny and you said, he's left me, I'll never live again, I'll never love again. A good granny will say, never? Never really? And you'll go, well, okay, maybe not never. So not never. So people that really love you, will ask you questions that help you question the story you're telling yourself. It's very tempting to try and replace one story with another. Men do this a lot, right? Don't think this, think that. It's like, good luck with that approach. It can sometimes work. But I think that the most compassionate thing to do is listen lovingly to the story the person that's telling themselves, the story the person is telling themselves, and then ask some questions that allow them to change some detail in the story for themselves. Then they walk away with a story that they have authored, not a story that you've imposed. Does that make sense?
That is a wonderful piece of advice. I could apply that this evening. as soon as my engineer daughter gets home. Oh yes, this is so true. Thank you so much for that little pearl, David. I gotta tell you, I think we could talk on and on. We will have to make this a part 1 and 2. Very rarely do we do that on the Goodness Exchange, but I've got 7 questions we didn't even get to touch, and I love the energy, the fresh eyes that you're bringing to our daily experience, because we don't have to do anything special with anything David just talked about. We just have to walk outside our door and experience life with more of our mind engaged in just all the questions and all the possibilities. So if we wrap up here, I've got 2 last questions. One is, I always like to ask people, if this interview had been just 4 minutes or something, very short, what do you really wish people knew? Like sometimes when you watch the evening news or you see the troubles that folks are carrying, from your life experience, what do you really wish people knew? Just, do you ever say that to yourself? Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
have my thing. I really wish people knew their click was a vote. So everything they're getting their
Yeah.
attention to on the internet is just creating more of that. Um,
Yeah.
so what do you think it would boil down to for you?
Get itchy, I think. Itchiness is the part of you that knows there's a better way, and follow it. Yeah. Frustration is fuel. I don't mean that people should have frustrating lives, but somehow we were taught, no, 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 you should be settled and calm and everything's good. But I actually think a little bit of itchiness is really helpful. And it's the bit of you that, have humor with it, but love your itch. I think that's we are a protagonistic race. That's to say, we go on adventures and we pick up stones and I think we should be itchy with our certainties. Yeah, people are getting very certain at the moment, very righteous about who's right and who's wrong. But itchiness is a kind of, and I'm saying this to myself as well. It's also being less comfortable with your certainties and be a bit more curious and just hold it a bit lighter. And I think that's the other thing I wish. There's a wonderful guy I knew called Ken Campbell who used to say, this is all far too important to take seriously. And I think that's an incredibly important lesson, which is that if you have a serious issue, and we do, to address, do it with lightness, not heaviness. Because when we get serious about what's serious, we get stuck. So if I've got, people often talk about my work as being quite light, and I think it's something I've had to find in myself. But I think there's a lightness gets a bad rap, and I think it's what we need, especially when things are serious.
Wow. I'm going to think about that for the rest of the day. That's very, very, yes, that is a very, very profound mind switch that we can make, that we can throw that switch pretty easily and
You're
experiment with
light.
it.
I get it from you all the time. You're about it. My sense is, this whole idea of a conspiracy of goodness there's a little joke, there's a little mischief in there, which I think is so helpful.
Yeah, we got to look for a little lighthearted mischief in all our trials. I tell you, this has been a lovely interview. I can't thank you enough. Where can people give us the big major places that people can find your work and what you're open to and all that?
Yeah, I mean my website's called davidpearl.net. Street Wisdom is streetwisdom.org, and I'm sure we can put some details in the show notes.
Oh yeah,
What
there's
I
gonna be a lot
would
of
urge
details.
people to look at is what we call the Worldwide Wonder, which is I'm not sure when this episode is going to drop, but usually towards the end of September, we invite people that love street wisdom and newbies, people who want to experience it, to walk the world in 24 hours. And we have a series of events that unfold as the sun moves across the globe. And it's a lovely way of being part of that the community of the curious. And to exercise our imagination. So I'd warmly, welcome people, to hop on as the wave of wandering passes through your continent.
Ah, that's great. And just so people know, I am meeting with a colleague of David's with Street Wisdom, Philip. Oh, he and I have already fallen over a cliff together using words that are lovely and exciting and play on words. We will be participating in that in some way, and so I look forward to that September journey together. So thank you so much, David Pearl. Remember, everyone, that the Goodness Exchange is the place where you're going to meet 1,000 thought leaders doing their own thing to make the world a better place. Like David, if we just hop on there every day, 4 minutes of good news a day can improve your sense of gratitude by 12%. So recent science tells us 4 minutes of good news a day has the power to change your sense of well-being by 32%. Now, this is some serious stuff, and the more we can connect with folks like David and his team that are adding so much to our lived experience, the more we can live every day with less fear and more joy. And I can't thank you for adding your part to that goal. Okay, I hope the connections to goodness and progress that David and I have shared with you will help you through the rest of your week, and you start finding all the wonderful wonder that he and I have been talking about. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.